Yeah, it's funny how we get used to video calls now, hey, with the world how it is and things changing. And I don't know right now for you guys in India, is COVID pretty is it kind of like is it pretty bad? Is it kind of toning down or what's it been like for you guys?
Well, right now we are the third wave. It's really bad here, in fact, and it's just started. We haven't peaked yet. So it's going to take a little time to peak, and then we'll be decreasing later. So that's the issue right now.
Yeah, that's fair. That makes sense. It's it kind of does that, hey, up and down and but that's also life. So I hope you guys are all staying safe and have family who's staying safe because I know that's the tough part, right?
I think so. We can start. I request Vaibhav sir. Vaibhav sir is a part of our today's meeting. So I request
Okay.
Vaibhav sir. Yeah, he's the host for today. So Vaibhav sir, it's all yours.
Thank you, Prasad. So we are almost all here. Yep. So let's start. Greetings to everyone. I am Vaibhav Verma, host for today's session of the series A Conversation With. We have gathered here with the primary goal to understand the educational structure and the pedagogical implementation in the classrooms of Canada. We are a group of passionate pupil teachers from different parts of India who have come together for their love and enthusiasm toward teaching learning. Now, let's know about Metamorph Institute of Scholastic Education, or MICE, in the words of Managing Director Mr. Prasad Prabhu. In a gist, MICE is based on the motto Docendo Decimus, which means you learn by teaching. Teaching is not an easy profession, but people nowadays take this profession without any passion for it. So, we have planned for a program from a philanthropic view to educate the poor and underprivileged. The ones teaching them would be our passionate teachers practice their unique and attention-grabbing methodologies on those who are willing to learn. MICE aims for an educational revolution. What is our goal is that MICE considers its mission to provide an outstanding education to students passionate about teaching and aims to create a new wave of dedicated teachers who just not teach but also inspire them for life. And how do we do it? Well, it is our firm conviction that the structure of our programs should be practice oriented and based on work experience, as well as carefully designed case studies. This contributes to the development of our future teachers. The objective encompass the development of problem solving, communicational and presentational skills, and heightening of preparedness for professionalism. So, before we start the interaction, let me introduce our chief guest, Mr. Cole Hatchard, a secondary science teacher both on campus and online, and a course developer. He is also a freelance video content creator. He has done his Bachelor's of Science in Biological and Physical Sciences and Bachelor's of Education in Secondary Education and Teaching from the University of Alberta. He has worked as the Orientation Educational Coordinator, House Science. He has been developing in to kindly share his views about pedagogy and education, starting with a basic introduction to the educational structure in Canada.
We welcome you, sir, and requesting you to tell us what is the education structure or the education scenario in Canada. how is it a little different, or we can have a discussion of how it is different from that of India. So please tell us, what is education structure in Canada when it comes to pedagogy and teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question. And yeah, I'm happy to be able to share today. Again, I don't know, I love the opportunity to be able to connect with people who are excited about teaching as well. And, no matter how that looks, I think that's one of the coolest things I hope about, as we move deeper and deeper into the 21st century, that the way we teach as a whole can really, can and should change. I think, there's lots of amazing things happening now, but lots of amazing things that can happen. So, yeah, so in Canada, it's pretty, the system is pretty classic in sort of what, at the very least, what I know is really common across North America. So students tend to enter the system in what we now call junior kindergarten, and that's usually about 3 to 4 years old. And then they have grades 1 through 12. And at the age of about 17 is when they will graduate. And that's when, at least at the schools that I teach at, most of the students end up, as for many of you, moving into post-secondary. So it's the system itself, as far as the direction, or at least the process the kids are going through. I don't know. I'm not super familiar with the educational systems in India, so I'd be curious to hear how and if it's much different than that.
Well, the education system in India is quite similar. You have the primary age, you have the middle school, you have the high school, and then when you complete your high school, that's around the age of 17, you get into graduation. That's the same system there. But it comes out that we are a little when it comes to education. It turns out to be that to get into the graduation level of higher education, there's a little of competitiveness in India. So, is there any kind of competition for higher education in Canada?
There is, yeah, because it's become such an inherent part of the system, for sure. Students are, for sure, depending, I think, a lot on income level, but there's a high amount of competition. So that's what I find, especially as I teach primarily high school on the campus that I teach at, because yeah, like what was said earlier, I teach on campus as well as through an online school. And so, yeah, with the students, especially in high school that I teach, it is massively competitive. We tend to have, so in Canada, our education system is dependent on province. So I don't know, again, for in India, if there's differences across regions, or if it's standardized at a national or federal level. But in Canada, education is actually fairly specified according to the province. So I live in the province of Alberta, and that's where we have at the end of high school, we have what we call their diplomas. So they're a large set of highly weighted exams, which I'm sure you have a version of as well, to help the students, but to gauge students' acceptance into university level programs. And so that's where, again, a large part of being a teacher for high school for myself, and what I hope, for a lot of you, becomes, not just teaching content, but a lot of it is teaching skills that students need if they're going to go into post-secondary. Because for all of you who are looking to, or who are teaching, or looking to be teaching, you've gone to university, so you have an idea of what it takes to I guess have a high enough quality of knowledge, but also pedagogy, in order to move into a teaching realm. And so the skills that need to be developed. And so it's a big part of teaching students who are 1, 2, 3 years removed from moving into post-secondary. So I think that, especially for those of you who, if you are teaching that high school level, you probably noticed that, a big part of it isn't just, here's this information. It's, what kind of skills can you build so that you can take in information, no matter what you're learning it for, where you're doing it, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so it's one of those things that I find, a lot of excitement around, at the very least, because I know, even for myself when I was in high school, and I'm sure for lots of you, in your last few years of school, you kind of look back now and wish, like, man, I wish that my teachers would have taught me some some useful life skills as well, because I think that that's something where we tend to be lacking. And I think that when I look at the education system and how I'd like to see it changing, and what I'm trying to do for myself, even independently, is creating content that students can access in a way that's really, really individualized. So what I mean by that is ways for students to, well, one of the things that kind of has become a motto for me is just having multiple means of access and multiple means of representation, which again, not a unique idea. You know, it's not special to me, but the idea of, you know, if I can have multiple means of showing the kids, you know, this information, that it's not just about, you know, here's a textbook. It's not, and there's nothing wrong with textbooks, but that we all know, like, that's not how everyone's going to learn. You know, how do we utilize videos? How do we utilize hands-on experiences? How do we not only have diversity within all of that, but also just allow for multiple ways to go. Have you, has anyone read books that are like the choose your own adventure books, where you get to a certain page and then it says, hey, if you want the character to do this, go to this page, but if you want them to do this, go to this page? Has anyone read a book like that?
Maybe it's Goosebumps. I've read that book in the primary ages.
Yeah.
It's basically there's a page number mentioned at the end of the page that go to this page in order to know the further stories.
Totally, yeah, and I mean, when I was a kid, I loved those books because it was so fun to be able to say, like, oh, I wonder what happens if I make a character do this, and I can't imagine the planning that goes into writing a book like that. But regardless, I think that, you know, the more we can get closer to a choose your own adventure type of model when it comes to teaching, the better. So allowing students to come at the material in a way that, hey, you know, this is where I'm already interested in, and how can I be introduced to this new concept through that? And then from there, okay, this is the next part that interests me. And so even for myself, something as simple as, you know, as a teacher, I might have a plan of, you know, the first week of January, this is what we're going to do. And then the second week, and then the third week, the fourth week, and then an assessment. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then I thought, well, why is it specifically in that order, especially for maybe kind of lower levels? Like, I teach a lot of junior high classes as well, or middle school, so kind of 12 to 14-year-olds. And, you know, for them, the content isn't so complex that they have to be looking at it in a really specific linear fashion. So it's like, okay, what if I just allowed them, you know, here's all the stuff you're going to learn. Which one do you want to do first as an individual? And I think that there's a lot of value in that, because the kids have buy-in right away, as opposed to, you know, just taking it for granted that us as teachers have, you know, the individual kid's best interest in mind, which we do, but we can't, because we have classrooms full of students. We can't cater to every single individual at all times, if that makes sense, at least in the traditional form that we've been teaching. What are class sizes like for you guys? I know it'll depend on the school, but I know for us in Alberta, high school classes tend to be anywhere between 30 to 40 students. What does it look like for you guys in India?
In NCRT books, there is they are like talking books. They are instructing the students, yes, collect some leaves, or like they are talking, go to this page number. So NCRT books, for example, EVS books, they are like the talking one. And as we go to the secondary section also, 6 to 10, there also the books are like the same, NCRT ones.
Okay, interesting. That's really cool.
So basically,
NCRT,
yeah.
NCRT is like a national publication of books. All throughout the country, we read those books because it is a standard syllabus that is formed for students of those age. Like, for a certain age group, you need to learn these concepts. But they're wonderfully made sure, they're wonderfully put forward by NCRT.
Okay, awesome. And is that a governmental organization, or is that private?
It's a governmental organization which believes that education should be equal and it should be qualitative when it comes to students.
Totally, and I think that's
It
Sorry,
was
go ahead.
established in 1961, and basically NCRT is responsible to also frame the curriculum of the secondary education system. As you said that in secondary education in India, that if, for example, let's take class 10, and if there are 40 students, then NCRT says that you have to cater the student individually according to their need, and you have to evaluate and give remedies as well. So this is what NCRT is doing. It is guiding the work of teacher as well as of student.
Totally. So then because I think that's great, and it's very similar to what I think about our provincial government and the ways that they regulate our education. But that's why I'm what I'm curious about, because and maybe the pattern in which, I guess, the baseline experience of a student in India might look different than it does here, because I know for ourselves as many teachers in Alberta, they struggle because we have these curricular objectives that are given, and we're given a certain amount of time, and class sizes, as they get larger and larger, the more students you have within a particular amount of time, the less you can cater to every individual, right? So I think that's where, at least in the traditional form of teaching, and so that's why I say the more that we can increase the ability to diversify and allow students to work on learning in a way that's really specific to them, the better. Which sounds like, with the help of this organization in India, that sounds very much more possible. Myself, I've just, especially over the last handful of years, I've found that I think that as we move further and further into the 21st century, I think that teachers will become less and less teachers and more what I call facilitators. Because the content is so accessible, right? Like I think about, like Khan Academy. Like I tell my students all the time, like you have Khan Academy or, crash course videos on YouTube, just YouTube in general. I tell the kids, I'm like, I could die tomorrow. You guys would finish this class. You don't need me. Like I'm not here because you need me, because I'm the expert on all the content. I should be the expert on how I help you get through the content, if that makes sense. But I think that as teachers, at least where I am, we get really caught up in, I have to be the best or the content specialist, and you do, but that can't come before you are like the student specialist, right? We need to know how to help kids get through content, which is already widely available. You think 15 years ago, we didn't have YouTube in the extent that we have it now. So it makes sense. Yeah, okay, we have the textbook. We need to rely on the teacher. I had a professor. He called it. We rely on the model sage on the stage, right? That we are so used to just like the person who knows everything. We put them on the stage and we just sit and listen. But I don't know. I mean, I don't have a lot of students who love to sit and listen for 60 to 80 minutes at a time, nor should they. And so I think that that's one of the best parts about being able to utilize, especially resources that already exist, but also making resources. And that's one of the areas that, for myself, I found a lot of passion in, kind of in a supplementary to my education. So I have started doing a little bit more video creation in the last handful of years, and I'm not really great at it, but it's fun. Like it's just fun to be able to make content that I know the kids will enjoy. And so that's one of the things to be, yes, guide on the side. I've heard that. I love that. That's very well said. And so, because to me, the more I'm at the front of the class, the less I can help individual students. So I'm like, well, if there's areas where I can turn what would usually be me kind of presenting some material into accessing information in a different way through videos, through textbook, whatever, and then I can just be with the students as much as possible, that makes the most sense to me. And that's where a lot of my online teaching, that's how that looks, because there's a lot more flexibility with the online school that I teach at. So because I only see those students once a week, I have to, I'm forced to ensure that they can get through the content in a way that where there's options for them to access in ways that make the most sense for individuals. And then I can help and touch base with these individual students when they have questions, if they're stuck, when they're doing a lab at home, whatever that looks like, instead of worrying about constantly trying to just lecture, I guess, if that makes sense. But I don't know, it felt like I felt like a lot of you guys connected with that idea of just trying to, well, like what was said, that guide on the side, right? Trying to be the facilitator instead of just the presenter of content all the time. Yeah, and I love that. I love the passion that I can feel through the screen. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely, sir. So a teacher should always be a facilitator rather than to control the class. And sir, as you know that today evaluation system is very get digitalized in a way, and we know that students need remedies and they need TLM teaching learning material with the content, and also there should be the use of digital technologies. So in a direction where teacher is working on so many platform in class or on digital platform, what you think? We would like to ask you that how children should be evaluated uh, in Canada as well as in India using these technologies, and how we should evaluate children rather than the written examination, how we can evaluate them.
Yeah, that's a good question. How to evaluate them, and I think that's I think as a teacher you will always be wrestling with. I think we'll never really perfect that, and not to undercut that we should constantly be looking at how we can get better, right? Practice makes better. You know, it doesn't make perfect. We'll never get there, and that's okay. But I think that's a great question. I think that it really depends on the outcome. And my assumption is the way that your curriculum is set up is likely similar to ours, but we have curricular objectives that are categorized into different areas. So there are knowledge outcomes, there are skill outcomes, and then there are attitude outcomes, and then in some courses, technology outcomes. So I think that a lot of it depends on the type of outcome that you are evaluating, as well as even the course that you're teaching. Because I think that when it comes to really classic forms of evaluation, you have, here's a test, you got 9 of them right, so you got 90%. Like there's value in that, and there's going to be a shifting value according to what you're teaching, to whom you're teaching it, and so I think that as a whole, I would say just everyone cut yourself slack to know that you're going to be learning constantly. Like you can't, some of you are teaching students now, some of you are, by the sounds of it, at least not just as a student teacher, in a year or so. And so I think that cut yourself some slack and allow yourself time to, just really play in the space. That's an area that's something that's often said. I don't know if anyone's ever done any like improv, like improvisational acting. And so, but they always say, let's just play in the space, because oftentimes it's easy to, a topic comes up and we want to just move on, right? I want to get better. I want to just perfect it. It's like, okay, just like, let's give ourselves some time to just experience what works and what doesn't, because you'll even find that for yourselves, all of you with your students, you're going to be noticing different things than your friend who's a teacher as well, right? When you're sitting or when you're in a classroom, one of you might notice the students who are doing a lot of art, and so that's what you're noticing. It just comes to your eyes first, whereas a lot of you might notice first the students who every time they have free time they want to read. And so there's things that we're just going to recognize first, because we're all different, and to use that to our advantage to say, okay, I notice that there are some students who they like to draw, so how can I allow for an option for a student to be evaluated where they can choose to use art for that. Whereas, for others of us who maybe didn't notice it at first, you're like, oh, I feel so dumb, I should have known that. It's like, well, no, you couldn't have known that. Give yourself some time and some flexibility to recognize, because eventually you'll get there. And so I think that, and that's where it comes back to one of the things I said before, right? That I want to have multiple means of a student accessing content, but I also want to have multiple means of representation, which what I mean by that is multiple means of a student to represent their knowledge. So when it comes to evaluation, right now, I'm a huge fan of just like building rubrics, because it's just really, really clear. The students know exactly how they're going to be evaluated. But then I make sure that rubric can cater to multiple different kinds of projects. So I have students who, they want to make a Google Slides presentation. Fantastic. It's not revolutionary, but that's what they're excited about. To the point where then I have students who they want to make a diorama, make an art project. I have students who want to draw a picture. I have students who want to, I had a student submit to me like a podcast episode the other day, as a way to show his learning, because I think that's the other part of evaluation that I would touch on is, and this will sound tougher than I think it actually is, but putting the onus on the student, because I think again that's where, and maybe this is just a Canadian thing or North American or whatever, but I think that students are often what's the word I want to use? They're just not well prepared for real life because they've had teachers tell them exactly what to do all the time, right? Here's how to do this project, and you as a student go, yeah, okay, I'll do that, and then it's like, okay, then we're going to do this, and you go, yeah, okay, that sounds good. Which again, like, we need someone to guide us, but we've given up so much autonomy, and this is what it comes back to what I was saying earlier about trying to help the students build a lot of different skills, skills for real life, and one of those skills is autonomy, right? Just that sense of, okay, here's who I know I am, and now I am me going through this information, going through this content, whatever that looks like, instead of I am part of this class and we're all going through this. And so a lot of what I've done is, if a student is like, I don't really, I don't love writing essays. It's like, great, neither do I. And there's value to that for sure. And there's a time and place, with the point being, it's like, so then what do you think? Like, how can you best show me what you know? Because they might not know right away. Like, it's not one of those things where you see in a movie, the kid, it just clicks right away. They're like, I know exactly what it is. But again, that's where it's that guide on the side that was said earlier. It's up to us to help the students build that autonomy and say, what, I've noticed that this is a way that I love communicating what I know. So I have a student right now who I teach her online, and this is the second year I've taught her. And for every project I've given them, she has always opted to make a video. And it's become a video series because it's not just a video saying, here's this information. She loves just like film in general. So she loves creating videos, but she loves acting. And so does her brother, who I also teach. And so her content that she gives to me for evaluation is it's kind of like this continuing series about this particular character, where she's able to bring in the content that we are learning, or whatever she is presenting her knowledge on, to be relevant to that character. And it would be totally unfair for me to expect that for every student, but it works so well for her. And so the more I can make my evaluations as flexible as possible, the better. Now, I know that probably doesn't really answer the question, because you're asking about technologies, but I think that for myself right now, the more I can allow students to use technologies to represent their learning, I can cater my evaluation around that. And so just being super clear with the kids of, like, literally one of the things I'll do is I'll pull up the documents from the government online that say, here's what I'm given as a teacher of the things you need to learn. So it's like, here's this thing. How do you want to learn this thing? Right? Okay, awesome. And then here's this thing. How do you want to learn this thing? And obviously giving them options and more or less freedom according to the age. But I think that that's where, again, the more you can have a means of evaluation that is as flexible as possible for multiple means of the students representing their knowledge and their learning, the better. And I've just found right now rubrics kind of tend to be that area, and they're not massively time consuming, so I still have the time that I can give either verbal or written feedback to the student. But it becomes even just a really quick touch point. Even as a student is working through their project, if they're not done, whatever it is, it's like, okay, let's check in. Let's look at this rubric that I've already given you. What would you rate yourself right now? Where do you want to, increase your knowledge? Where are you feeling like you're struggling to get to, on this rubric that you would like to? Does that make sense? I hope I didn't too much hyper focus on rubrics, but I think that that's one of the areas where it's really just taking what is given to us by the government as, here's these curricular objectives, and putting them into ways that the students understand it better, right? Like you probably hear of, like, I can statements all the time, right? The more I can take, an outcome that is written in government language that nobody wants to understand because it's, sometimes convoluted, right? And turn that into an I can statement for students. Like, yeah, I can do that. Or like, I'm almost there, but not quite. Does that kind of make sense? yeah, I don't know if I know that doesn't
Yes,
fully
yes, it
answer the
does.
question, but sorry, what was that, Prasad?
So it does make sense, because I believe that there should be flexibility when it comes to evaluation. Else, you don't know how creative a student is. So definitely, this is one really good takeaway from today's session.
Totally, yeah, because I think, and again, it doesn't mean that we should never have like a multiple choice test. Like that's not at all what I'm saying. But I would never know, like a student who has this, recurring character in her movies that she's making for me. I would never know that she has that passion if I was only giving those kinds of tests. And so again, it doesn't mean, I think it's tough as teachers because we want to have, like, we have this idealism going into it, right? We have these ideals of like, man, this would be amazing if this is what it looked like. But we're also dealing with, our materials that are already in a particular form. And so it's really easy to get, just exhaust ourselves thinking that I'm going to get to this ideal right away, because you're not. Like we just can't, because you have, your own life and mental health and well-being to take care of, and that's going to take, to get from where the education system is to your ideal is going to take more hours than there are in a day if you want to do that in a year. So you got to kind of find the one thing. There's a really good book. It's called The One Thing. I think it's written by, I can't remember his name, but that's the whole concept, is just like we can't focus on multiple things at one time, right? The person with 3 priorities has none. And so finding that one thing for you as a teacher, you're like, this is my goal this year. And so I had that, 1 year of how do I wanted to try kind of like a flipped classroom. So that's where a lot of like the video content I was making initially came from. Was like, okay, here's my goal this year. I'm going to take one unit. I'm going to make it a flipped classroom. I'm going to see how that goes. So, I made video segments. I found articles for students to read. I found other online resources, and that's what I gave them to do at home. And then in class, that's when they were just working on their projects. And so, but if I had expected myself to do that for every unit for the whole year, for all the classes I teach, I would have burned myself out and stopped teaching, because I would have been like, this stinks. Because all of you are on this call because you're excited about teaching. But that's also something that you need to constantly be tending to and taking care of, because the passion for teaching is going to be dependent on, like, no one can maintain passion through something that is miserable all the time, right? You can maintain perspective, but you can lose that passion if you're not treating yourself properly. Like, I love ice cream. If I had ice cream for every meal, like, I would just eventually be like, I can't do this anymore. And so just allowing yourself the flexibility to know, like, okay, I know this isn't perfect, but I can't devote my time to this yet. And even making that list of, here's the first thing I want to be able to do. You get your teaching assignments, you know what age group you're teaching, what subjects you're teaching. I would even start with, like, here's the class I'm most excited about, because that's going to help fuel you to try different things. And then from there, you'll learn, okay, this worked and this didn't work. Now I'll try this in one of these classes later on. So I think that, again, it's a matter of, having those priorities, and just giving yourself, again, time to just play in the space, see what works, see what doesn't work. One of the things I said this to a student yesterday, I'm like, we only succeed by failing, right? We always assume that the opposite of success is failure, but the opposite of success is quitting. So as long as you're willing to let yourself fail, you're great, like, because that's the only way you're going to be a better teacher. Because what I see, at least in where I teach, like in this province, the teachers who haven't changed anything for 25 years, those are the teachers that, A, none of the kids like, and B, they don't like teaching. And so it's just like, okay, so like that's the way you can feed that passion ongoing, is by constantly trying new things. And so I can't remember what the question was, or even if there was a question. I think I just was talking at that point, but I hope at least that little bit added some value. But I think, again, like when I see those of you on a call like this, Saturday night for you guys. There's a lot of cooler things you could do on a Saturday night, I'm sure. But here you are, listening to some guy from Canada talking about teaching. So clearly you have an excitement and a desire to learn. And that's what I just hope you continue to take into everything in your teaching. It's just like, hey, I just want to try this. I want to do like, it takes vulnerability to try new things. Like when I was, less so now, but especially the last 3 years, as I started to try new things, I had lots of teachers at the school say, that's not going to work. Like, that's too idealistic or whatever. And I'm just like, who cares? Like, I'm going to try it anyway. And some of the things have failed, like teachers said they would, but lots of them haven't. And lots of them have been like, oh, sweet, this worked way better than I even expected, or it worked in a different way. And so I think, even coming back to the question, even about evaluation, it's like, even you as a teacher are going to evaluate differently. Like I really like giving written feedback. I'll still give verbal feedback, but I love giving written feedback. Whereas there's a teacher at my school where like kids will do a presentation, for example, and the first thing they do is they come and they sit with him for like 2-3 minutes and they just talk about the presentation. They just do it verbally, and just finding those, because I wouldn't say that his verbal feedback is better or worse than my written feedback. We just have different preferences. And even just finding that for yourself, what works best for you will be best. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Ashu. I am pursuing my degree graduation from Prarambh Jajjar, which is a dual course. Now, I would like to ask my question, that is, what all activities can we integrate while structuring our timetable? How is the early foundation of students taken care of in Canada?
That's good. Sorry, you said the early foundation, is that what you said?
Early foundation of students taken care of in Canada.
Yeah, do you mean like age-wise, or do you mean kind of like the first basic concepts?
From basics, how they will start to boost up their qualities in the students.
I think it's a good question. I think there's a difference between how it is and maybe how it should be. I think that and if I'm understanding correctly, so usually practice. Like I think that like when it comes to just like foundational, like you're asking like basic foundational concepts, how do they take it in, correct?
Yes, sir. I'm asking that how the process is doing in Canada, that they start from the early childhood of the students, taking care, and they are giving lectures in what manners that they will give their best and they will take the best from the students in their younghood.
Yeah. I think like a lot of it's got to be, and I'm going to talk, and the kids are going to listen, and it's like if they're 8-year-olds, there's not a chance. Like I was 8 once and I didn't listen to anything, and so I think that it's really dependent on the age group for sure. Now the way that our education system is set up here is we kind of, it's sort of like a I tell the kids it's kind of like a spiral. So it goes around and around, but it also goes up at the same time. So we have sort of a 3-year repeating process from grades 1 through 12. So for the first 3 years, we kind of hit on sort of the really main basics. So when I think about the basics in math, the basics in science, the basics in writing, those are what's hit on first. And then the next 3 years, grades 4, 5, 6, they all hit on those again, but just slightly outside of their initial understanding. And so who is that? I think it's Vygotsky, the educational, or I think he wasn't even an educational psychologist, he was a psychologist in general, but just working just outside of their comfort zone, and understanding, okay, we're going to take that one more. Sorry, say it again, Prasad?
Yeah, I said it was Vygotsky who said that. Outside
yeah, and
comfort zone.
Totally. And I love, yes, thank you. And so I think that's the way that we've tried to set it up, is to be able to hit on all of these things, because it can be really easy to, and there are places where it works better, where they hammer on a concept for 2 straight years, but then the kids don't really come back to it again. I think that it's going to be really dependent on what you find it really, again, works for you. But what I see works really well is sort of that always coming back to it, always coming back to these concepts and building a little bit more. So for example, I teach grade 7 science. So these are like 12, 13-ish years old. Now the scientific concepts we touch on, not all of them, but most of them, these students have learned in grade 4, so 3 years ago. So, for example, we're talking right now about structures and forces. So they've done some work with structures. They have some understanding of how we build structures to accommodate for gravity, for example. But now it's like, okay, well, we talked about that 3 years ago. So what is gravity? Like, let's touch on, what gravity is and what is the normal force. Like, now we can introduce a new kind of force, because I know that you have sort of this initial understanding of gravity. So it's that in Canada, at least, we have sort of, like I say, like sort of that rising spiral. Same thing, I teach grade 11 biology. And so a lot of the biological concepts that they learn in grade 11, they learned in grade 8. And so that in Canada, that's sort of how it is set up, and it tends to work fairly well. Actually, does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. It was a great question. I love it. Are you hoping to teach kind of earlier ages?
Not specifically, so it's secondary also.
Okay, gotcha. That's awesome. So is that the case? You guys will teach like multiple ages, or do you specify within one age group?
So there are different courses related to different age in India. Like, I have done a diploma in elementary education before my bachelor's degree in teaching. So that is specified to elementary education only. But when I'm talking about bachelor's in education, that is for the secondary education, where students up to 17 years, 16 years are involved. So
Gotcha.
that is.
Okay. So it's a diploma for elementary and then a bachelor's degree for kind of secondary. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Oh, okay. Interesting. That's very interesting. In Canada, the expectation is, so you have a bachelor's degree regardless, and then your specialization from there. So that's that's really interesting. It's cool that it's structured that way for you guys. Okay,
Actually,
I see. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Actually, sir, it is same. Like, bachelor degree is to teach up to class 10. But if you want to continue teaching after your 12th or secondary education, then you can pursue a degree in elementary education, diploma in elementary education, where you can start teaching the elementary section.
Okay, gotcha. Awesome. Thank you for clarifying. Sorry for my misunderstanding. That's really interesting, though.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I see we got a question in the chat. I'd like to know the workload on the students in Canada. It's the number of subjects per year, number of chapters, homework, and exams. Yeah, great question. So number of subjects per year. So I guess let me start with, I'll say, so elementary, obviously they're going to learn every subject every year. So obviously their science class isn't specialized between biology, chemistry, and physics, but in elementary it'll be, they'll have all classes. Same thing with junior high. Once they get to high school, so grades 10 through 12, or kind of 15 through 17 years old, they will take usually, and it'll depend on the school, because some schools have semestered years, so they have 2 semesters. Some schools have 3 terms, and so it depends on how the school is set up. But most of the time, students will be taking 2 to 3 core classes a semester. So they might be taking math, biology, and social studies. And then the next semester they've got chemistry, physics, and English language arts. And so that would be like subject wise. And then on top of that, they're expected to have different electives, which again they get credits for, and they have to have enough credits to graduate, which I'm sure is probably likely similar in India. But anyway, so the amount of the workload though is really honestly pretty dependent on the teacher. So and the school even. So because our provincial government, all they give us are outcomes. And so, and you can let me know how similar or different this is in India, but we are only given outcomes. So all of the work, all of the lessons, everything, like all of the day-to-day stuff is all dependent on the teacher. Is that similar for you guys? Or are you guys given like, here are the tests that the kids need to write, here are the assignments? Which of those sounds more like what you guys have? Like, do you have the flexibility? Like, if you show up to teach like a high school science class, are you given all of the materials, or you just say, here's the things they have to learn. Now it's up to you how you go through that.
Actually, sir, talking this. Sir, if I talk about my personal experience, that how I grab knowledge, then during that time we were given assignment on a particular topic, and we have to do group work together in order to gain knowledge about it. But if we talk about the today, the holistic change that came up in the education system, then we will then there is activities involved in the classroom where student can grab knowledge, and they are given freedom in the classroom, like do whatever you want to do, get knowledge about it. Assignments they are given, activities like videography and other digital platform are used by our teachers. And if I talk about the teaching in our classroom, then there is a teacher of education, that is Pragat sir. He used to give us assignment like to create video on a particular topic, to create pamphlets. So these are the methods used in our classroom.
Awesome. And is that yeah, okay. No, that's great. That's very helpful. Thank you. So the workload is going to be dependent on the teacher. I tend to give the students, my high school students anyway, because I know that a lot of them are going to post-secondary. I tend to work them pretty hard. So like I'll give them, a quiz almost every day. So when they show up in class, we'll have a quiz, and they're not worth very much. But the point being is that I try to make sure that they have a really good understanding of what we did the day before, because I don't love assigning a whole bunch of like really specific homework, because again, every student's going to learn differently. So if I assign a whole bunch of specific homework, well, then it might not cater to all students, right? Because a student is required to just answer these questions from the textbook, which isn't bad, but they might learn better by creating a concept map of the information. So usually what I assign are, here's this section of this content we went through today, here's what we're going to do tomorrow. So make sure that you understand what we did today, because I'm going to quiz you on it tomorrow. So the workload is going to be really dependent on the teacher, even the school, just because, if I was, the first school I was teaching at was kind of an inner city school, meaning lots of non-academic students. So they were there basically because they had to, just to graduate. And so that's where I wouldn't have done the same thing, because kids would have, I would have lost them immediately. And so that's where I'd adjust the workload for sure. Currently in India, we are in the midst of changing the teaching approach from behaviorism to constructivism. Okay, I would love if you can, because I think constructivism I've heard used in just a multitude of different sort of fashions. I'd love to hear kind of what that means for you guys. What is constructivism and what you've been presented with?
Well, in India, the operational definitions of constructivism is that we use this approach as before in the behaviorism, the teacher is the center of the classroom, but now the teacher act as a facilitator and divides the all strength of the student in little groups, and he is he has his own learns by provide.
Yeah, the clarification. That's what I was picturing in my head. But because again, like like I've heard it used. How did I hear it? Someone had talked about a theory of constructivism within education that was it was much more cool instead of practical. That's the only reason I asked. But that's exactly the whole point, right? If we're aiming for that form of constructivism as teachers, like it just doesn't make sense. Like what's the point? Because we all know, even for ourselves, that we learn by building on what we knew from beforehand. So I tell the students all the time, we're going to go through, some information initially, like kind of our basic concepts. And I say, treat these as if they're coat hooks, right? So like you're going to hook your coat up on it. So what I mean by that is, it's like if you're drilling these coat hooks into the wall, and then they're all on the wall, so that later, as we go through different information, you have different coat hooks to hang things on. Right. So it's like, oh, okay, this is connected to this idea here. And I say, even as before you come into the class, you guys already have coat hooks. Now, everyone has different coat hooks. So it's up to you to discern which coat hook is this concept going to match best with for you. Because we know that that's how we're going to learn, by building off of, hey, I remember doing, even if it's something as simple as, the students remember doing some kind of project, 3 years ago. It's like, great, I know I'm going to do my best to match that, as they go into this concept. Hey, remember you built that bridge in 4th grade to help test, how much weight or what kinds of structures would hold more weight. Okay, well, take that. And I want you to think about, now that you've learned these other concepts, what would you do to change or alter that bridge and make it more effective today? And ideally, we would actually do that, right? Let's rebuild a bridge. Think about what you did when you did this last time and try to adjust according to what it is that we've learned already. So yeah, the constructivist approach absolutely is that is education. That's always been how we learn. Excuse me. It's always been how we learn. It's just, unfortunately, the education system is only now catching up to that.
So may I ask now?
Absolutely.
So how to feasibly plan our lectures, like in such a way that children of different understanding levels do not face difficulty in learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think that's always one of the intimidating parts of, because we're still going to lecture, right? There's still going to be some sense of how they're going to getting information. Now, we don't always have to, like that can shift and change. But I think that's where, when it comes to lecturing, how is it going to work best for you? So if I was like, I try to lecture as little as possible, and not because it's the worst thing in the world, but most of the kids, like, have you guys heard of the Pareto principle? Which is essentially just that 20% of the students will, produce 80% of the work, and then 80% of the students will produce 20%. So essentially, it's a pattern that we experience when I lecture. If I'm 5 minutes into a lecture, I've lost 80% of the kids. Like, they're glazed over, they're looking at the clock, and I'm like, yeah, I get it, because it's boring. So I try not to lecture too much. And if I do, anytime I'm talking at the front, I try as often as possible. And this is just, remember, before I say this is specific to me, because this is what I feel confident in, as well as the material I teach. So because I'm primarily a science teacher, especially biology, I teach through stories all the time. So for example, if I'm going to be, if the students are learning about like the heart, the circulatory system, then I will tell them stories about, a couple hundred years ago, when our best medicine was to use leeches, right? To take out blood, because we assumed that, if you were sick, it was because your blood was wrong. There's something wrong with your blood. So we'd use leeches or bloodletting, which, especially when it's kind of more extreme and gross, kids love it that much more. But finding those ways where it's like, great, I'm going to tell them the story, because they'll remember the story, because we all remember stories. And then I have them, connect that to what it is that they've learned, whether it's from a teaching from me, a video they watched, something they read in a textbook, whatever, right? And say, okay, what have we learned since then that helps us understand the immune system better? Okay, well, we know we have an immune system. We have, these white blood cells. We have T cells and B cells, and we can kind of just go from there. So I love coming back to what I was saying about like those coat hooks. I love making stories, those coat hooks. So when I say, hey, you guys remember when we talked about how like George Washington, right? Like one of the founding fathers of the United States, like he died literally just because he got a cold, and the doctors came and they just kept letting out his blood until he bled out and died. Which like that's not a story we hear very often, but like the kids are like, "Hi, I remember that," like because that's crazy. Now, obviously, like George Washington is more of a significant figure. Canadians, we tend to just sort of adopt anything that's American and say like, oh, that's kind of our culture too. So that works for us, but finding those things for you guys. And so, because that's where there's kids buy in all the time. The more that we can talk about things that are related to history. And if you ever do, there'll be times where a lecture might still have to happen, the more you can break it up, the better. The more I can make it a discussion, the better. They have a club where they work out in the mornings at the school. So it's like, great. So when I talk about anaerobic sport and how that builds muscle, they're my examples now, right? Get a kid, come to stand at the front, flex for us all, what is it like, what's going on here, using them as examples. Because again, like that's where it just becomes more engaging. Now, again, that takes time. Like my first time going through, like my first year teaching high school biology, it wasn't that interesting. It wasn't that fun. There were things I tried to make fun and things that worked, but most of them didn't, because I just needed to figure out, what do the kids actually need to know? And once I had a basic understanding of that, then, okay, like let me play on this a little bit. I love to read, so I would try to read lots of books that would serve that style of teaching of, I want to read lots of history of medicine, for example. So again, that was long-winded and not a good example of how to lecture because it's just me talking. But Priyanka, I hope, does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, sir, totally.
Okay, great. Yeah. And again, it's just like have fun, because the kids will have fun if you're having fun. Even if, because you're not going to mesh with every kid. Like there's lots of students who I have that they really couldn't care less to be in Mr. Hatchard's classroom. And, I just kind of go with it because they're teenagers and, they just have a vendetta against adults in general. But I'm like, hey, whatever, like we'll just play around with it, joke around. It's not I think sometimes we can be too serious, and the kids don't buy into that because they're not serious about they're not serious about the same things we're serious about, if that makes sense. So, like for example, I talk about structures with my seventh graders. We talk about Fortnite all the time, so it's something that's just very relevant to them. Yeah. Anyway, any other questions?
Yeah, good morning, sir. I hope you have a great day today. Myself, Chavi Saini, and I'm pursuing BSc B.Ed from Scholastic Hatchard only. I would like to ask you that for an Indian teacher, what is the scope and what are the educational requirements over there in Canada? Like, are the Indian degrees sufficient, or do we need to have some extra degree courses if we wish to pursue our teaching career in Canada?
Yeah, you mean if you're coming from India to Canada?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
That's a good question. So it's going to depend a lot on the area of the world you're coming from. I specifically don't know from India. Now, I will say, okay, so I had a substitute teacher come in for me a few weeks ago, and she had just moved to Canada from India, and I'm trying to remember what she had told me that she had to do. Her name was Divya, and I saw the name come up. I was like, what are the chances? And of course, it's not going to be the same Divya. But anyway, she didn't have to complete a full brand new bachelor's education, but you will always have to go through a certification. And that certification process is going to be a combination of education, so classes you'll have to take beforehand, and then evaluations after that of your teaching. So for me to be a certified teacher in Alberta, that took me obviously the years of education plus the about a year or two of certification through evaluation beyond that. So it would be very possible. Now, Alberta is our curriculum is actually pretty well recognized in a lot of different countries around the world. So lots of places are looking for Alberta teachers because of our, I don't know if I would say like high standard, but it just has become recognized. And so that sometimes can mean it's a bigger jump depending on where you're coming from. But to my knowledge, excuse me, of the teachers I know who taught in India first, it wasn't too big of a jump that it wasn't possible. And again, it's going to depend where in Canada you go. Because provinces like Alberta, where I am, or Ontario, with Toronto, the cities people actually have heard of. That's where the standard goes to different. The world is looking for teachers everywhere, and teaching is a really cool profession because you can do it anywhere. I'd recommend even doing that. And Xavi, if that's what you think, trying to teach elsewhere just for the experience, like go, because you guys are all young as well, and so the more you can go different places and understand different cultures, like that's going to help build the stories you're going to teach your kids 5 years from now as well too, right? I remember one of my favorite teachers ever was my 5th grade teacher, and I don't remember one thing I learned in the curriculum in grade 5, but I remember him and I remember his stories all the time. Very beneficial.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Any other questions I can answer?
Okay, for the time being, I'll ask you a question, sir.
Yeah, please.
Basically, I feel that I'm a kinesthetic. Yeah, I feel I'm a kinesthetic teacher. I feel activity-based classrooms are really important. So, what are the activities you all integrate in your teaching? In basic activities,
Yeah,
that's there in the curriculum also.
Totally. So I would say it's very rare that like actual activities, at least for how our curriculum is set up, it's very rare that like this activity fits with this curriculum. It's more that this activity addresses these specific knowledge outcomes or whatever, which I think is still what you're saying. Yeah, I love just changing it up all the time. So, and again, it depends on the class, like and the age level I'm teaching, but I like to, especially in science, the more we can be hands-on, the better. So there are times where we'll do, a research assignment, like here, find a topic that you're interested in related to this content. Let's do some research on it. Sometimes it's just live research where, hey, we're going to be looking at let's say diseases in human body systems. And so it's just like in that moment, like I want you guys, somebody find an interesting disease and tell me about it right now. And then while they're telling me about it, other kids are, looking for another one. And sometimes we'll get to the point where it's like, who can find the grossest one and, stuff like that. But again, it's just more of, let's play around with this and see what happens. I like to do lots of drawing. The more that, this is maybe where I have a little bit of bias, but the more that kids can represent their knowledge through images instead of writing, the better. Because I tell my students, I'm like, even just like from an evolutionary perspective, you have eyes on the front of your head instead of the sides. And that's because you were made to see everything so you could, pick those berries or hunt that antelope or whatever it was going to be, right? So we are primarily visual creatures. Now, yes, are there people who have different tendencies to learn through audio or through kinesthetics? For sure, but our baseline is all visual. So I try to do lots of drawings, and I tell my students too, because I was the same way. When a teacher said, hey, like in an art class, hey, it's time to draw. I'm like, oh, I hate drawing. Like, I'm a terrible artist. But what I tell my students is you don't have to be a great artist. You have to be a great labeler is what I tell them. So it's like, draw this, but just like label what it is. It doesn't matter what it looks like. If you're trying to draw a heart, yeah, it doesn't look like a heart, but just write heart beside it. That works just fine. But because genuinely, that's what a kid is going to remember, because that's what they see in their head. Like, very few people are going to have thoughts in their head of just lines of text. We can do it. We can learn to do that, but it's not natural to us. We are very, looking for connections, right? So it's like, here's this idea. It's connected to this idea that I already had. Oh, here's this other new idea I'm going to bring in because that also connects, but it also connects to this older idea. And that's a cool way that I can see that connection now. So lots of graphic organizers, which by that I just mean like, let's draw this out. Here we're going to talk about secretions in our digestive system. So it's like, here's our digestive system. Here's this secretion. Well, here's what we're secreting. Here's the function of that secretion, which is also a function of one of these secretions, which can get convoluted, but to be honest, it brings up more connections than not. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else. I do lots of Quizlet. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Quizlet, which is an online website. Yeah, so Quizlet, if you're not familiar with it, I see lots of you guys nodding, but if you're not, it's basically just like online vocabulary practice. And I really emphasize vocabulary, especially for my middle school aged kids, because like I said before, with that spiraling curriculum, the kids are going to hit on this concept again in 3 years. So build a really strong vocabulary now so that you can, benefit down the road. So, let's use Quizlet to, build your own set of vocabulary with definitions, but then let's practice it all together. Using Kahoot, there's so many online games to, practice things like that. It's just going to continue to increase. Things like Edpuzzle. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle is a website where you can put in a YouTube video, and then you can insert questions into it. So for example, if I want kids to watch a YouTube video, instead of just watching a 6-minute YouTube video where some of them might lose interest 2 minutes in, it's like, well, every 30 seconds or 45 seconds, I've got a question. They have to answer it before they can move to the next part of the YouTube video. So just like, there's lots of things like, and again, that repertoire builds over time. So don't expect, lots of you, again, you're teaching now, some of you are, finishing your education, whatever it looks like. Don't expect to have this massive repertoire in your first or second year of teaching. Like, just be looking to build it over time, right? Be looking to build it so that, after 5 years, you should have a pretty good repertoire. Now, you're not done, but now you at least have something to go with. And that's been my experience. And so I hope that that's sort of what, the attitude we can take in is, just try different things. Be open to trying something. Even if you're like, I don't know if it'll work, just try it, because you'll learn something from that you wouldn't have known without trying it. So yeah. Which education level do you follow blended learning? So that's a good question. So I started doing that as a whole class with my 7th graders, so with the middle school. They because they're 12, 13 years old, their attention span is almost nothing. So because I know that, then it's like, okay, if I can have this sort of blended learning, that's going to be the most effective, especially within a flipped classroom. Because now when they're on campus in front of me, I don't want to use that time to just talk at them. So this is going to be the time where we're working on activities, and at home is when they watched a video or read an article or their textbook or whatever. I've done a little bit of that with my high school students, but I've left it very individualized. So if it's tweaks here and there, seeing what works and seeing what doesn't. There are some videos I made for my grade 7 students that they watched it and they're like, I'm lost. I'm like, that's a good point, because this is an easier concept to learn in person when we're all together. But some stuff, a kid can just watch a 5-minute video and be like, oh, okay, I have a basic introduction to this concept now that I can use. Yeah, does that answer that question? I see. We're part of your class to experience everything. I appreciate it. Oh, thanks. Well, I can say whatever I want. You guys have no idea how miserable my students really are. No. That's what I tell them. Whenever I assign them a homework or a project or something, and they complain, I say, this isn't because I want you to be miserable, right? That's only a small part of it, right? There's other reasons why we're doing this, okay? But again, it's just like finding what makes sense to you. Like, yeah, be yourself. The more authentic you can be, the better. If you're trying to be another teacher, you're not going to have fun, and your students are not going to have fun.
Sir, I have a question with me, so may I ask?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sir, as you told us that there are kindergarten school and high school. So what is the difference in the teaching methodology in kindergarten school and in high school, the basic difference?
Yeah, the basic difference is going to be mostly just like the generalized content. They still will have like their class, but instead, like in high school, obviously you're going to move from classroom to classroom because you're going to different teachers for different concepts, and obviously that would never work for kindergarten or elementary age students, but they'll still have sort of specialized teachers. I find that for the teacher, it really depends. So for example, I taught some elementary in my first experience teaching, and I found that I really like to have sort of distinct, here's this period from here to here where we're going to learn our English language arts, and then from here to here we're going to learn about math, and from here to here we're going to do science. But I have other teachers who, in sort of that elementary or kindergarten aged school, they like to take, we're going to take this whole morning and we're going to do English language arts, but it's only because they know that they have lots of activities to make it interesting. Because obviously, like for myself, if I had to sit through half a day of math, I would shoot myself. Like I would be awful. So it's like if we are going to do that, it's because I know I have all of these different activities to make it interesting, which can be useful. Like I like for science, for example, if I want the students to be doing a really big hands-on experience, well, yeah, then I can take that whole morning and do it. So there's just a lot more fluidity, lots more flexibility with those teaching methodologies, because when they're younger, there's also just less, what's the word I'm looking for? There's less pressure, I guess, right? If you're in 4th grade and you kind of stink at science, it's like, that's okay. Your brain's changing. Like, give it a year. We'll see what happens next year. So there's more flexibility to kind of move around. Does that sort of make sense?
Absolutely, sir.
And you've probably found a similar thing, with with how you described your education. You've probably even thought that way of, sort of, this is how I might change up my classes, for elementary versus secondary classes. All right, we got a comment here. A research enthusiast believe that academic research forms an integral part of educational endeavors. Yeah, how has Canada incite research culture within school students? Absolutely. So that's a great question. One of the biggest parts of our science curriculum is investigation and creating that attitude of investigation and research. So it's a really, really big part of what it means to just be a science student in middle school or high school or even elementary in Canada, especially in Alberta, because the whole goal is to ask questions, because that's what, with science, at least, that's what science is, right? Science is asking questions. But I see this in all curricula for any subject, because the whole goal is, how can I experience something and then ask questions about it and do research beyond that. So we have, at my school at least, we have tech specific classes. So what that means is the students will have a class every other day that is dedicated just to technology. So it might be, learning how to use different technologies better, but a lot of it is, how do we do good research? How do I find credible information? Because again, like I was saying earlier, the more we can use online resources, the better. But the flip side of that is, if you're 13 years old, there's a pretty good chance you don't know what a scientific journal is, or how to read one. And so being able to find good sources of information is really important. So that's where it's sort of balanced between always asking questions and having that sense of investigation. Lots of research projects, I know for sure, in all classes, but especially in science. And then balancing that with, always being sure we can find credible information, because it's easy to do a Google search, but that doesn't guarantee that's the best information. One of the things that I've found has really crippled a lot of students is, you'll notice if you do a Google search of something, Google will have like the best recommended information that comes up first, right? Not just the link, but like, here's that information. If I want to know how tall is LeBron James, that it'll say, he's 6 whatever. But for a lot of students, they think, well, Google told me that. It's like, well, no, Google got that information from another website and they put that there. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the best information. It's not even complete. Sometimes it's an excerpt from a paragraph. You need the context. So trying to teach the students things like that, because again, it comes back to those skills I was talking about earlier. The more we can help these kids develop skills, like, where do you get good information from? Because that applies when you are, for example, right now, there's a lot of, I don't know if it's similar in India, but there's a lot of contention around, the vaccines for COVID. Should people get vaccinated? Should they not? Things like that. But people not knowing, I got this information from my grandma on Facebook. It's like, okay, like, I don't know if it's going to be the best information. I don't know your grandma, but how do I check that information at least? And so whether it's that, or I don't know if, again, in India, I don't know if you have the same divisiveness that we have right now in Canada, but I know as humans, we're all a little bit divisive. So I'm sure there's at least some of it. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, Harshit. But yeah, I think I've got time for maybe one more question if you guys have one.
Good evening, sir.
Hi.
Hello, sir. This is Manju. And yes, sir, I need some tips, especially when you're allowing the digital devices to your classroom.
Sorry, say that again. You cut out. You need tips on what?
So especially when we are the teachers are allowing the digital devices with the children, with the learners, to our classroom. As you have said, you have been practicing this blended learning from the class 7th itself, right? So we are
Mhm.
here not at been introducing this concept, especially with the mobile devices. We are not allowing them. It's just we deal with some computer lab, we take to the computer lab, and there they can be working, or else we will be having some flipped classroom kind of.
Totally. Yeah. And that's a great question. So is that like across India, like expectations that there's no mobile devices at all, or is that specific to schools?
So just specific to schools.
Okay. Yeah. That same thing here. Yeah.
If we wanted to integrate, so there obviously there are some challenges, like we need to track upon their device, like their work, what they're doing in their devices. And I'm thinking, as you said, you will allow them to, you prefer images for the disease when you're taking example of one concept on diseases. You said you prefer getting images from them rather than just writing upon some paper, right? How do you
Yes.
manage that? Do you use a common platform for that to work with everyone or individually?
Yeah, good question. So let me address the second part of that first, of like specifically the drawing. I do pen and paper for drawings, because for them to draw digitally, I'm not closed off to it. I have lots of students who they might have an iPad at home that they'll use to design a project for me. But if we're going to draw a picture all together as a class, I always do pen and paper, because that's where they'll be able to experience that. Yeah, does that answer that part of the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so then the first part of just like in general, how do we just work with students, like tips on allowing students to use devices, because yes, like especially if you've got middle school students, like they're going to be distracted all the time. But really all students, I mean, even for ourselves, like I'm sure for lots of you, there's probably been a temptation to like look at your phone, right? Because we just have that as a natural inclination. The phone is made to distract us. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and I think there's a lot of schools trying to figure out what that looks like. I find for myself, so if I start with my high school students, all of my students have phones. Our school doesn't have a policy against them having their phones at school, so I just have my own policy. So I say that if I'm at the front, if I'm ever talking to everybody, I shouldn't see the phone, because that tells me that you don't care about what I have to say. Because to me, it's like, it'd be the same as if I was, having coffee with somebody and they just pull out their phone. It's like, well, that stinks, because that just communicates to me the lack of value you see in my time right now. So it's less about like, this is what I said, and so you should just listen to me. It's like, no, like I'm trying to teach you, a specific life skill here. But it's going to require me as the authority figure that if you're not responding to that, then yeah, I'll take the phone away. I'll just bring it up to the front. And kids don't love it, but they buy into it still. With my middle school students, I just expect them to, and this is where from my school it works, because we are the students are expected to have their own laptop, but and some students will have a mobile device like a phone. I tell them to leave their phone in their locker or their backpack. And then for computers, I just know for myself, if a kid has a computer open, they're not listening to me. And so to have those times where you are hard and fast, this is when your computer should not be your focus, I should be your focus, is important. So I'll tell the students, like my go-to is, flip it down or turn it around. So what that means is, if you get your laptop open right now, I'm going to talk. So you either close it or you turn it so it's facing me, because then I know, you're not using it, because I see what it is. Like you couldn't be using it at that point. So it's just defining routines, and it would be the same as anything else, right? The fact that, kids, whether they have mobile devices or not, they're going to misuse their time. They're going to get distracted. They're going to bother each other. The kids are most successful when they have routines around that. So a lot of the time, my students just know when we are using devices and when we aren't, so that if it's out, they're usually, and it's not a time where we're using devices, they're usually the only one who has it out. And it's like, hey, what's the problem here? You look at everybody else. No one else has their computer open. So, put it away. And we do have more kind of policies around their computers. Like I had a student yesterday who, because they always try to hide playing video games or whatever. But I tell the students I'm not stupid. I'm just naive. So I might miss it, but I can tell when you're not so interested in what we're doing in class that you're typing like this. It's like you're playing a video game. Like I can see that pretty clearly. And so that's where like that happened yesterday. Took it from the student for the class. We kind of do it where I'll take it for the class the first time. If it happens again, I keep it for the whole day. And then if it happens beyond that, then I take it and I give it to the principal, and you have to go talk to the principal about it, because that's where, again, it's a matter of teaching the kids respect for the technology, meaning here's when to use it and here's when not to use it. Because again, that's why we have technology addictions, is because a lot of students, or a lot of people, adults even, don't know how to properly use their technology. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a great question. You guys all had great questions. I've loved being able to just give my perspective. Like, my answers to any of these are not the best answers in the world. They're just what I have now. And so I would encourage you guys to keep connecting with people, connecting with each other, trying different things. That'll be the best part about teaching, is having a community like this, where you can share, hey, this worked really well for me. And it's like, hey, maybe I'll try it. Or, I was thinking about doing this. Do you want to develop this project together? Because that's what's kept me going for the last handful of years. Are friends that I made in university, who I still text to this day. They all teach within Alberta, so we have similar experiences. And so, I connect with them as often as possible. So that would be my recommendation to you guys, is just keep connecting with each other, with other people. And I don't know, Prasad, do you want to say anything before we head out?
Yeah, I think so. We should we should head towards a conclusion. It's already 1.5 hours. I mean, it was so good that we didn't realize we spent 90 minutes together.
Well, I'm glad. I hope that it hasn't been creeping along and you guys are like, geez, Louise, will this guy ever stop?
So it was a comment section one day in some teacher's post that we met, I suppose. And there was a brief interaction right there in the comment section. And then later we realized the resonance that we have for teaching, for learning, and for pedagogy. So we just thought that one day there should be a time where we can exchange ideas. So I must say that today's evening was marvelous. Thank you so much, Mr. Hatchard, for making this evening so beautiful. Because it is really truly said that a teacher is the one who can make the whole world a home. And today, as you said, we need to interact, we need to stay together, and we need to grow. And once we enjoy teaching, our students will enjoy learning. And that's where our ideal classroom comes forward. Thank you so much for making this evening so wonderful. And I'm sure everybody here, everybody enjoyed the evening. Because the moment I told them about you, that I'm going to have a talk with this, everybody was curious. Oh, wow, we're going to learn something new. We're going to exchange ideas. And this is where we reached. And I must say, one of the most productive 1.5 hours of 2022 was this one. Thank you so much.
I'm glad. It was my pleasure. And for all of you, feel free to, if you have like social media, send me a request, like on Instagram, I think is really mostly what I have, or LinkedIn. And because if you have questions, like I would be happy to respond even beyond this, right? Things that come up, I love to give any perspective I have. It won't be perfect, but it'll be what I've got. So awesome.
Is there anyone else who wants to share the feedback about today's evening? It would be really wonderful to hear from you all too.
Yes, absolutely, Prasad. First of all, I'd like to start up by telling that, so we were really excited about this session. And you said that on Saturday Eve, it was a lovely time we spent, and we gathered so much knowledge from you, which we will definitely use in our teaching when we will face the students. And definitely we will try to build up that experience and bring forward the students, and we'll definitely use those methods from which they will learn, and will allow a free environment where they can do whatever they want. If they want to learn, we will welcome them. And specifically, I learn a lot from the Canadian education system and the experience that you have given us, indirect experience of the classroom. But definitely, I wish for the direct experience. Someday, I would like you to take our mock lesson where we will able to gain more experience from you. That's all, sir.
That sounds like a cool idea. I like that.
Okay, one thing, just one moment before concluding, I would like everybody to turn on your camera so that we can have a group photograph before we leave, so that we can cherish this day forever. And so, we would like to hear from you some other time too, somewhere in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. You let me know. I like to hear myself talk, so anytime. No, I'm just kidding.
So everybody, please turn on your cameras and look into the cameras and a wonderful smile. Vaibhav sir, are we done?
I think here. Let me try one more time. Here. Let me try that one more time.
Okay. Okay. Once more. Okay, everybody.
Okay, I think I got one.
Okay. And one last request. Everybody with a namaste. Namaste.
All right.
Namaste is a way you greet everybody in India and you thank everybody in India. And since you were our teacher today, everybody would like to thank you. So everyone, namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, you guys. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Hatchard. Nice talking to you.
Yes, nice to talk to you all. Take care, and hope to touch base again sometime soon.